Good morning, and welcome to Los Angeles. I hope that over the next couple of days, you'll take time to explore this wonderful city. We are in the heart of historic Little Tokyo. Many great places to stop and eat and shop, and just across the way is our arts district. So please take advantage of the beautiful weather, the beautiful city, and explore while you're here. And speaking of exploring, as we explore how technologies can help us advance mobility goals, OMF continues to drive the conversation on how digital infrastructure and open source tools can mutually benefit the public and the private sector. True to this goal, and leading at the intersection of technological progress, collaboration, and mobility is the city of Los Angeles. And so for those who don't know me, I am Laura Rubio-Cornejo. I'm the general manager of the Los Angeles Department of Transportation. And so in addition to welcoming you to Los Angeles, I have the pleasure of welcoming you to the OMF Summit, and to tell you a little bit of what we at the City of Los Angeles are doing to advance the OMF goal of advancing technological progress and mobility. We continue to leverage technology as a tool for augmenting resources, better understanding how the public right-of-way is used, and interpreting that data to inform decisions about how this finite resource can better serve the public as we continue to advance our commitment for safer, more equitable, multimodal streets. As part of a $2 million US DOT SMART grant, we are coding Los Angeles's curb space, no small feat. Starting with digitizing 85 miles, we gotta start somewhere, in select Los Angeles neighborhoods, in addition to digitizing all of LADOT's parking meters. We expect that once completed, we will better understand how our limited and overprescribed curb space is being used and better manage it through policy, programmatic efforts, and partnerships with the private sector. And in real time, this week, we are launching a new asset management tool. For far too long, we have not had a digital database that tells us precisely what assets we have invested in our streets. This includes treatments, signs, infrastructure. And so the new system will be updated every time field crews are out there installing new infrastructure. And while this might seem small in a city the size of Los Angeles, almost 500 square miles, that is an undertaking in and of itself. And we continue to explore technologies that help us supplement our constrained resources. Assembly Bill 645 identified Los Angeles as one of 6 cities in California that can implement a speed safety program using strategically located speed safety cameras. Currently in the planning phase of this program that will result in a 5-year pilot to evaluate the speed safety system's impact on street safety and economic impact on the communities where cameras are installed. And lastly, we have partnered with LA Metro to pilot a bus lane enforcement program using automated license plate recognition technology to identify vehicles illegally parked in bus stops or in bus lanes. This program is designed to increase the speed and reliability of transit services along the city's busiest transit corridors, ensuring that those that rely on public transportation have a more reliable, safer, and more efficient experience. At the Los Angeles Department of Transportation, we continue to explore how technology can help us advance our goals, and I invite you to learn more over the next 3 days, either by participating in one of our workshops that we are hosting this afternoon at 1 o'clock, or attending any number of sessions while you're here. As we kick off today's OMF Summit, I'd like to invite up and welcome fellow OMF board member, Francisca Stefan. Francie is Deputy Director of Capital Project Delivery for Seattle Department of Transportation. Prior to this role, Francie served as the acting chief mobility officer and assistant director of planning and community development for the city of Santa Monica. While there, she led the city's transportation policy, strategy, and implementation efforts, such as Expo Light Rail Extension, the Colorado Esplanade, Bike and Ped Plans, Go Samo Mobility Campaign, Coast Open Streets, Breeze Bike Share, and the Shared Mobility Pilot Program. Francie was a little busy while she was in Santa Monica transforming culture there. Yes, that deserves an applause for sure. Prior to Santa Monica, she worked with the city of West Hollywood, where she initiated her green building program and general plan update. But as I mentioned, she is now the Deputy Director of Capital Project Delivery for Seattle DOT. Please join me in welcoming Francie to the podium.
Good morning, everybody. It is awesome to be here with you. So yeah, welcome. It's just great to see such, 200 people registered for this here to discuss something that's really valuable to all of us. It's such a great diversity of people. I love that about OMF, that we've got the private sector, we've got the public sector, we've got universities, excuse me, a little frog in my throat today. Universities, nonprofits, it's really just a phenomenal space for us to have this collaboration. So it's just wonderful to see all of you from domestic and abroad. And really, OMF fundamentally is about the people for me. Which is a funny thing, right? Because I don't know if you've ever tried to describe OMF to family members or friends. It's an awkward thing to describe, to say the least, right? You lose people pretty quick. But it's one of those things that's so fundamental to the sort of backbone of the way our cities work, and it's such an important tool that we've developed together, that for me, sort of one of the ways I've come to think about it is it's about the creativity of the people that have made OMF come to life. And I really am excited to be with you here these 3 days or 2 days or 1 day, however long you can stay, to do the next steps of that and to talk about it. So certainly the last couple years have been dynamic, and the last 12 years have been crazy. When I was thinking about and reflecting on OMF, I was thinking about sort of when we launched. I have my launch t-shirt, I dug it out. 2017 launch, or 2018-19 launch t-shirt. And I was thinking about where we were at that time, and it was a pretty wild ride, right? Travis 1.0, I call him, for Travis Kalanick, had launched Uber, and cities were kind of reeling from this like congestion and movement and curbside use and abuse, and it was a kind of a crazy time. And then came Travis 2.0 to Santa Monica, Travis Van Der Zanden with Bird. I will never forget sitting with him having ice water outside of Starbucks in sunny Santa Monica afternoon, and he said he had an idea for a new mobility mode, and we said we'd love to help get your legislation all set up and get you all on the up and up, and about 3 weeks later they were everywhere, which I guess he knew. But it was both exciting and super challenging, right? Like exciting that there were these new markets and these new ways to get around, and people could leave their personal cars at homes, and then they could leave their car entirely at home. And this worked in so many different urban environments, and it was so exciting, but it was also phenomenally challenging. And it was phenomenally challenging at the city level. And for those of you in the city space, you know what I mean. We had super fans who were emailing us weekly with pages and pages and photos and videos they were taking of people riding scooters on sidewalks and parking, and scooters tipped over, and ADA violations and all the things. And and then the politicians would get wind of it, and all of a sudden you're in as a public employee defending this private entity, and you're excited about it and you're supportive, but at the same time it's a very weird space. And in that, I have to give a phenomenal amount of credit to LADOT and Salita Reynolds and her team there, and all their consultants, because around the mid-2010s, they were sort of hatching an idea quietly, and it became very powerful, and it eventually evolved into this. And they invited cities like Santa Monica to the table, and we were able to collaborate and finally create something that brought us to the table, something that created a space where cities could talk to companies. We had a common language. Because if you go back, right, pre-MDS, this was a Tower of Babel, right? Every company had their way of doing it, had their way, had their interface. Cities couldn't plug in. We barely had the infrastructure to understand what the data was doing. And we didn't have a space to talk, and we didn't have a way to talk to each other. And it was really phenomenal that LADOT invited these other cities to the room and ultimately sort of graduated that space into a space of public and private partnership, well-structured, well-organized, that can live on. And that is really exciting to me, and exciting that we are here today as part of that, right? We are part of it having become a fundamental structure of how our cities work and how we get to work together to make cities work well, but also to help good new mobility come to life and help support it and foster it and help new markets of mobility, whether it be personal mobility or goods mobility, really come to the space. And certainly, I don't want to fail to really celebrate some of the sort of bright-eyed, bushy-tailed dreamers, Kagan Maher and Hunter Owens, who I don't think are here, but they wrote MDS 1.0. Those two guys, Kagan was a Santa Monica employee, Hunter was an LADOT consultant or employee, can't remember, I think employee. One day, we were getting on the expo line going home, and Hunter got off the expo line, and we were like, "What are you doing here, Hunter? You're 10 miles out of your work zone." And he's like, "Oh, I'm going over to Kagan's house. We're gonna write some code tonight." And eventually that sort of graduated up into MDS 1.0. So I just want to sort of acknowledge that, part of the people part of this is sort of some people taking the reins and just taking the inspiration and running with it and really making something new and taking a chance. And I think the Curb Collaborative is a bit like that as well, right? It's a chance of these cities coming together to solve a sort of perennial problem that we have with curbside and how to make it work well for cities, how to make it work well for businesses and people, but also goods and all of the things that need to happen to make a city tick. So I just sort of feel that we're in this evolution of OMF, and I think this is a wonderful space. We're here together these couple of days to sort of maybe get together and talk about what it could be. Think about and dream a little bit about what the next steps could be, what the next piece could be, and maybe share ideas. Find some collaborators, kick ideas around together. Think about, do we have things in common that we haven't talked about before? Do we have some opportunities? Did something change in our local environment that now there's suddenly a spark of something? Because it does take sometimes that spark. And I think this is an exciting time for us to maybe have those conversations, find those alignments, see what we can do together, and think about the future. Because OMF fundamentally is about the people, and I think this is our chance to sort of vision it together, this time we spend together, and to come up with some ideas for the future and learn. I was also reflecting on this, and having been an OMF OG, going to launch in Louisville, I'll be honest, I still have to ask the dumbest questions about MDS and CDS. I mean, and I think I would encourage everybody to continue to ask all the dumb questions, right? How does it work? I'm not a coder, I'm not a technical person, I'm a policy person and a city person, but I think this is also a good space for us to sort of put our heads together and just ask the sort of blanket questions hey, I've always wondered about this. How does that actually work? On your business side, how does that work for you? Or on the city side, how does it work for you? So, thank you for being part of this space. Thank you for making time for it. Thank you for seeing the sort of backbone infrastructure that this is and this critical part of how our cities function, and being here to help create it and being part of the brain trust, this now larger network that we can all see each other and do these great things together. So thank you for being here, and I'm excited to talk with all of you in the next days. Thank you.
All right, good morning. Welcome to the Open Mobility Foundation Summit. This is the second time we've done this event. We started small last year, grew bigger this year. Thank you all for coming. This felt a little bit like my 12-year-old birthday. When you put the invites out, and then you just kind of wait and see if people actually show up. But you showed up. It's great. You're here. And we had more than 200 people register for this event. Really excited to engage in conversations today and leading into co-motion tomorrow and the next day. So it's a great start to what's going to be a really fun and interactive set of conversations. So Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Francie, two of my really important board members who are leading this work forward. And I want to just mention, a little bit like Laura and Francie mentioned, OMF started as an idea just 5 years ago. So mid-2019 is when the Open Mobility Foundation was founded. And that idea has grown over the past 5 years into an organization that can host an event that brings together more than 135 different organizations, companies, cities to engage in what is otherwise quite nerdy conversations, but really important conversations, really important discussions about the future of not just our cities and communities, but really the way we move around those cities and the future livelihood of those places. But there's an enduring principle that has existed sort of throughout the OMF's time and will continue to be an enduring principle, and that's collaboration. But even more than collaboration, the OMF is about co-creation. What we do in developing these open source data specs, which again can get really wonky really quickly, but on its surface, it's about bringing together the public and private sectors to work hand in hand to create the tools that both need to enable the successful sort of futures that we want in our cities. And so at its core, the OMF exists to help cities and other public agencies navigate the digital mobility transformation that's happening before us. So you heard a couple examples, whether it's scooters, whether it's services like Uber, whether it's autonomous vehicles, whether it's digitizing curb space. These are all examples of how cities are living the experience of navigating this digital transformation that's happening. They can't do it alone. Just like the private sector that's creating the tools, the services, the opportunities that exist through these different mobility innovations, they can't do it alone. It uniquely creates an opportunity for true collaboration, or as I like to call it, co-creation. A couple of themes that you're going to hear throughout today's session will focus around safety and climate policy. Because as much fun as it is to come together and to talk about different uses of the mobility data specification, the curb data specification, we really need to focus on the why. The why do this, the outcome, the actual benefit to our cities, our communities, our companies. And a lot of that is around making our streets safer, making our cities and communities cleaner, and the air easier to breathe, and addressing issues like climate change. So you're going to hear these themes recurring throughout the course of the day. But you're also going to have a lot of opportunity through the sessions that you see on the screen here to engage in real discussions about the importance of that collaboration. The importance of doing our work day in, day out on a virtual setting, but also being able to come together and have in-person discussions like we're able to do today and at CoMotion over the next couple of days. So I wanted to point out what you see on your screen here. But today is going to be made up of a series of both panel discussions as well as an opportunity for some workshops. Laura mentioned the LADOT-led walk shop they're going to do for their curb digitization work in downtown LA. It's a very exciting effort. We actually had a stronger registration for the event than we were originally planning for, so we added a third workshop. And we wanted to create an opportunity for those of you who may be a little less familiar with the Open Mobility Foundation, a little less familiar with MDS and CDS, and want an opportunity to ask those, I would never say dumb questions. There are no dumb questions when it comes to this work. There are a lot of really good questions, and so there's an opportunity to get in and get under the hood a little bit more on the work that we do and the specs. So we'll also host a workshop at that period. It's kind of an OMF 101 session. And then in the afternoon, there'll be additional panel discussions. We'll end the day with a really great and engaging keynote discussion that's focused on telling the story. We can talk all about the importance of data and the importance of having more information or insights applying technology, but when it comes down to it, we have to tell the story of why this all matters. And then, of course, we'll have an opportunity to share a drink at the very end with a happy hour just around the corner at Far Bar. So before I turn this over and introduce our next speakers, I wanted to take a minute just to bear with me, do a few thank yous, because it's really important for an event like this to recognize the folks that help make it possible. So first of all, I want to thank John Razant and Tim with CoMotion for being great partners and letting us really come together with them and host the summit in conjunction with CoMotion, could be able to continue the great conversations over the next couple of days. But I also want to recognize a few of the OMF board members who are in the room today, from Francisca Stefan and Rubio-Cornejo, who you met just a moment ago, Victoria Wise from San Francisco, Art Pierce from Portland, Ramses Madhu, my board chair from San Jose, Tim Sexton from Minneapolis, Akshay Malik from Philadelphia, and Hema Shephers from Amsterdam. Just representing a subset of the OMF board, but demonstrating their leadership by being here and really engaging with the event and all that we're doing here today. Of course, this event wouldn't be possible without the OMF team, my incredible team, and leading this event with Angela, Aileen, Michael, Mitch. If you're around, raise your hand. They'll be around today. And again, no dumb questions. Ask them anything. We also have a team member. Unfortunately, M was not able to join us. M had to go back home to the East Coast. Unfortunately, got sick. So that rounds out the OMF team doing some great things. And then also the sponsors for this event. Because like any event, there's people, there's other types of energy and activity that goes to putting it on, but our partners in this event are really critical to allowing us to bring this to you today. So Rick Neubauer from Emojo, Ahmed Darrat from INRIX, Mark Fumar from Modi, Jordan Justice from Automotus, Sunny and David from Clever City, Christy Hirsch from Blue Systems, Christian Gutierrez from Passport, Ariel Fleischer from Waymo, Michelle Michelini from MITRE, Viggy Ram from Serve, Yu Kitamura from Sony, and Laura, of course, from LADOT. Thank you all for your support of not only the OMF, but this event specifically. I just want to give those partners a big round of applause for this. Last but not least, the members of the OMF. If you're a public or private sector member of the OMF, you raise your hand. I want to just see who we have, like the cities, company representatives. The OMF is a membership organization. We're a little bit of a paradox because as an open source organization, you don't have to be a member to engage in our work. We are a low barrier of entry organization that really encourages everyone and anyone to contribute to the development of these specs, hence the focus on the co-creation. But at the end of the day, we're a membership organization, both representing a city-founded and city-led organization made up with partnerships on the commercial side. So if you want to know more about joining as a public sector agency, joining as a commercial company, please talk to any of the folks here from the OMF team, myself, or find existing OMF members, and they can tell you what an amazing experience and opportunity is to be an OMF member. All right, with that, I'm just going to leave you with a couple of thoughts just related to those two themes that I mentioned earlier. And really what I had an opportunity walking away from a recent study tour in Europe that we did. And a big takeaway for me from that trip was the opportunity to use our specs, and in particular, the curb data specification, to advance climate policy in our cities. And I think we can all admit that there's no time like the present to help cities advance their goals and their desired outcomes when it comes to climate policy. The digitizing the curb and the management of public space is an incredibly important opportunity to advance climate goals and policy at the local level through things like zero emission zones, or as Portland, Oregon is doing, zero emission delivery zones. The opportunity to take what is otherwise like physical and analog infrastructure and digitize it, create the flexibility and the opportunity to use that public space in new and different ways to advance these goals is going to be really key. So think about that as a tool to advance the goals that we have in our cities and communities, even when thinking about managing major events coming up. Here in Los Angeles, we're a short time away from hosting the World Cup as a host city, as well as the Olympics in just a year or so after that. So there's the specs themselves are kind of interesting, but really it's about how they're used and the impact they have on their communities. And that's what this summit and the convening is really focused on and is all about. So I encourage you to kind of keep a couple of those thoughts in your mind as you go about the day and enjoy the time. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my friend, member, sponsor, Ahmed Darrat from INRIX.
Good morning, everybody. Super excited to be here as a sponsor today. OMF holds a very close place in my heart. My name is Ahmed Darrat. I'm the Chief Product Officer at INRIX. But I spent half of my career in the public sector at the City of Seattle, and the second half of my career at CityFi and at INRIX. And so OMF bringing together public and private is something that I hold very, very dearly. And I'm going to go back a little further than Francie did, as far as kind of, it wasn't the creation of OMF, but I think it was the Big Bang that created OMF. And it was 2016, the day after the election in 2016. Russ Brooks, sitting up there, had gathered us all together in Minneapolis in a basement of a hotel room. And it was probably the first time that you had a number of executives from all around the country together, and it was for the Transportation for America Smart Cities Collaborative. And like I said, it was the day after election. It felt like a funeral in there. But one of the person I'm going to introduce from CityFi, Karina Ricks, there was another partner from CityFi there that day, John Tolva, and he was the first person to speak that day. And it was a really motivating speech where essentially what he said is transportation mobility happens at the city level. And as long as everybody in that room banded together and figured out how to work with each other, it didn't matter who was running the federal government and what was coming out of the White House. And that was essentially the Big Bang where, conversations were happening across, San Jose. Ramses was there. Like I said, Russ was there. He wasn't working in Minneapolis at the time, but he was there. Marcel Porras, who was at LADOT at the time, and a few other folks. And that's really what started this thing. So, as we fast forward to kind of, a replay at the federal level, I want to just kind of remind us all that, we're in a much better place today than we were 8 years ago. And OMF is a big piece of why we're here. We've been able to get together, create these data standards around the public and private sector, figure out how to work with each other to improve safety, to improve climate outcomes. And the federal government, we brought them along with us. So you have the CURB collaborative that's happening right now. And that's been able to not only bring cities to the table, but also bring private companies like INRIX to the table. So we're really excited to be partnering with San Francisco around bringing the first implementation of CDS citywide and combining assets with CURB policies and making that publicly available. We're excited to be working with the Portland on their zero emissions delivery zones and bringing MDS to e-cargo bikes. And also sharing their CURB data citywide with their e-cargo bike partners, Beeline. We're excited to work with 2 more cities about bringing MDS and CDS not only to the curb, but to travel lanes and to sidewalks to be able to implement that for AV readiness and for construction coordination. And finally, one last city that we're working with is bringing CDS together with safety measures like crashes, near misses, and risky driving behaviors to understand what the impacts of different curb changes and curb policies are to safety. And so with that, I want to introduce 2 folks here that are going to be doing our fireside chat. 2 good friends of mine, Karina Ricks, who's a partner at CityFi. Karina is a former executive at both the DC Department of Transportation, at the Pittsburgh Department of Mobility and Infrastructure, and at the FTA under the Biden administration. Karina draws on her international city federal and private sector experience to unite governments, communities, and companies in advancing equity, safety, climate preservation, and economic growth. And our MC for this next session is Julia Thane. Julia has 15 years experience across public, private, and nonprofit sectors. She's dedicated to transforming innovative ideas into impactful actions in equitable climate solutions. She's the co-founder of 2 Degrees and Rising, where she collaborates with companies and governments and investors to scale solutions in addressing the climate crisis. Julia also previously served in roles at the Rocky Mountain Institute and here at the City of LA in the Mayor's Office. And so with that, I want to introduce our two guests.
This is the equivalent of being muted on Zoom. Hi, everybody. It's so great to see you all, and I'm very excited that we have this calm, quiet, and safe space for nerds that we're able to create together. I'll be honest with you, I was prepared to moderate a very different fireside chat when we first decided to do this fireside chat. And we were going to talk about US DOT under the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. We were going to talk about AI and technologies and something called the City Observatory. And then last week, we decided to pivot. And so today, we are going to have a real talk conversation. And I am so privileged to be able to share the stage with Karina, who, as Ahmed mentioned, has experience across local, state, and federal levels and in public, private, and nonprofit sectors. And we're going to talk about how civic innovation is going to change. And we're hoping that this real talk, this 20 minutes of, it'll be slightly filtered, but mostly unfiltered conversation is going to inspire you all to have some real talk over the next few days. So with that said, Karina, I am just going to get right into it. And I want to talk about the next few months. We're November 11th, November 12th, whatever day we are. But we have a couple of months until an administration change. And knowing that this is mostly a local government audience, tell me, what do you think that people should be doing over the next 2 months?
Well, first of all, filtering is not my strong suit, so we'll try and manage.
Unfiltered is fine.
Yeah, not put my foot in my mouth as I typically
I drink tap
do.
water. Yeah.
But, first and foremost is to secure any kind of grant awards that have been made. So if a grant award has been announced, whether it was 2 weeks ago, like the Attain grants, or a year ago, like many of the others, really moving swiftly to get those grant awards executed. I've been in local government. I know the whole process. You have, a month to put it in front of city council, and then city council needs to, have a comment period and then commend it to committee, and then on and on and on. There's not time for that. So needing to really figure out where are those grants, where have they been, where are they stopped in the process? Are they with you? Are they with the feds? Wherever they are, manage up if you need to manage up to move them forward in the federal government. If they're with you, you're gonna have to have a strong talk with your lawyers, tell them to suck it up and accept some of the provisions that might be in there, get them executed, work through your city councils to get emergency acceptance, approval, or whatever it is that you need to do. But the first step is, if those grant agreements are not executed, get them executed, get that award in place. Probably the announcements won't really change, but do you really want to take that risk? Even if you have executed grant agreements, get into contracting as quickly as you can. Your chance of preserving those funds, if you have an executed grant agreement and contracted services, are much, much less than if you are still in the wilderness trying to work through that. So that would be step number one.
I have a question about that, because cities are notoriously risk averse. And when I was in the mayor's office, we spent most of our time talking to city attorney about what would be the potential for getting sued or whether this was lawful or not. When you have stakeholders in the city who might want to move fast, but who are still pretty risk averse, in this particular situation, what do you tell them are the risks of moving fast and getting some of these contracts signed, or are there any?
Well, there are risks. It's not an advocacy to completely lose your mind and let that go, but these are not the first grant agreements in most cases. that have been executed. You've been through this path before, right? So you know what the provisions are, you know where the risks are, we know where the points of friction between local governments and federal agreements, usually in indemnification or in contracting provisions or things like that. So you know what those are. You know how you've solved it before. Really think critically about what those provisions are. Federal government is not known for sort of flexibility and bowing to the whims of local governments. There's only 2,000 of you versus one of them. So, they're not, in general, those provisions are not going to put the local governments in any kind of risky place as long as you are prepared to actually follow through on those processes. So yes, you still have to follow procurement rules. That's a place where you can get tripped up. You still have to bring local match. That's a place where you can be tripped up. And, not to be dour about it, there may be some motivation to try and find places where there has been something short of complete compliance in those grant awards that were being made. Don't let them have that opportunity, right? So you did sign an agreement, comply with it, and you should be fine.
Yeah, and I'm also thinking that just for departments of transportation, having some sort of task force that over the next 2 months is responsible for thinking about what are the contracts we want to move through, how do we engage with the federal government under the Biden administration to do that, is something that makes sense in terms of a process of moving this forward. But I want to widen the aperture a little bit, and we know that in 2026, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the Surface Transportation Reauthorization Act, is up. So how should local governments be positioning themselves over the next few years rather than just the next couple of months in terms of looking at what could get reauthorized, what should get reauthorized, and how they can benefit the most from that?
Sure. So good reading if anybody wants it. I think it's like chapter 16 of the Project 2025. The transportation chapter, go ahead and read it. I think, it outlays a lot of what we would expect with the incoming administration. A lot of it is very auto-centric. A lot of it is oriented toward the states. A lot of it is oriented toward highways, public-private partnerships. I think what the local governments and everyone needs to do as we head toward that authorization, which will happen not in this Congress, but the next Congress, or at least if there's not a continuation of this, is we really need to demonstrate with data how does the American public move? How does this relate to economic prosperity, household livability? Andrew talked about that we're really going to lean in at this conference, talking about climate, talking about safety. That's great. Listen to some of the talking points that have been said in recent months as well, which is a lot about affordability. And so there's some advocacy that says, we should just make auto travel cheaper because that will unleash the prosperity of the American household. Auto travel is not cheap. Auto purchases are not cheap. We need to demonstrate with data, using the mobility data specification, using the curb data specification, using other kinds of data reporting to really connect how Americans travel, how goods travel to prosperity, to economic success, and demonstrate what those investments do so that we can really inform the next transportation authorization with very specific data points.
How well do you think local governments are already set up to do that? Like, how well are we doing on tracking data? How well are we doing on setting targets? How well are we doing on achieving those targets? And what do you think is going to need to change in order for us to be more compelling at the federal government level?
I mean, I think the tools that the Open Mobility Foundation has developed has really helped a lot, right? We didn't have the language, we didn't have the common platforms to tell these stories, so that, to keep picking on Minneapolis and Phoenix and upstate New York, that they can all now report using the same language, using the same metrics, so that we really can talk on a national level of what the outcomes are from the various ways of managing our public rights of way, of having proactive management of various kinds of mobility services. So I think we're doing vastly better than the position that we were in 5 years ago, in that we now really do have these common, rich data sources that we can tell complete stories about.
Interesting. Well, now I want to play pundit for a little bit. And you mentioned Project 2025. You mentioned what might be priorities of the new administration. We talked a little bit about the former administration, so Trump 1.0 and now Trump 2.0. What would you say are some of the major themes that you would expect from this upcoming administration?
heavy leaning into public-private partnerships. Industry can solve things, as we know, that local governments in particular are completely inept and unable to influence. So, really thinking about how can you create those value-aligned partnerships with industry? So how can local governments find those partnerships that really demonstrate that, you can serve people, planet, and profit all at the same time, and not have to compromise on these other really critical outcomes like safety and climate and human well-being and, God forbid, equity. So, we can expect that. We can expect, again, leaning much more into highways, state-level, large infrastructure investments, never mind, again, that some 60% of travel happens on the local network, nothing to do with the national highway system. So we can expect more of that. There's some language around making sure that we're technology agnostic, so that the federal government should not pick winners or losers in technology, that we should let the industry decide for itself, except where autonomous vehicles are concerned. We should lead heavily into autonomous vehicles. That is the answer that will save you. So we can expect more themes like that. I do think that there's real reason for concern in public transit, and the perspectives around public transit as being perhaps a failed system. It is the only system that has sustained dense human settlements. So again, I think that we've got more work to do to tell the story about public transit being that backbone of a multimodal system that really works. So the other themes as well.
Yeah, and federal government, generally, broad terms, subsidizes major capital investments, but doesn't necessarily subsidize operating expenses. And so as local governments are thinking about where is money going to come from, both on the capital side and then on the operating side, what additional sort of policies or pursuits do you think might be interesting, again, over the next 4 years, or just in general, as we think about how civic innovation is evolving?
Sure. One hard truth that we still have not had the stomach to address, but will need to, is how transportation improvements are funded. The National Highway Trust Fund has had a structural flaw in it for a very long time, especially as we have increased motor vehicle efficiencies. Again, CAFE standards are a topic, but we're just not generating the revenue from liquid fuels tax that we once generated. That is going to have to be revisited. There's a lot of emphasis on user fees, which could be a very good thing for local governments and for the things that I think most of us in this room believe in. And so really trying to think again about what is that real estate that one person traveling takes up in a bus, in a private vehicle, in other modes. Can we assign user fees based on that utilization rate? Can we assign better value capture from our curbsides? When those resources then are being collected at the local level, it puts much more control in how those resources then are redistributed. We may find, as we know, cities are donor places to rural areas. I think that may come into acute focus when we have to make this shift more toward user fee means of investing in transportation infrastructure, which then can also be used for operating. Yeah. As we know, that's a serious deficiency in that there's a lot of federal resources for capital that are then precluded from being used for operating.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I'm hearing your excellent answers, very intelligent, obviously based on experience, and some of these things like user fees are things that we've been trying to do for years, agnostic of politics, agnostic of administration, agnostic really of anything. And what's been the blocker is people. People just don't go for it. They don't want those things. They don't want to pay for it. So do you think that anything has changed in terms of what people might want, or is there a way to position these programs differently so that people might actually go for them as opposed to vehemently being opposed?
Well, again, I think that there's just a fiscal cliff coming in the Highway Trust Fund and in other places that are really going to call to question what people are going to be willing to pay for and how they're going to pay for it. So. Again, all modes of travel, transportation itself is a sector that's heavily subsidized, both private transportation as well as public mobility modes. So that money has to come from someplace. Having the failure to deliver transportation infrastructure, transportation services will have immediate and I think very observable consequences. So yes, I'm not answering your question. No, people, turns out they like to get something for free when they can and for not to pay for it.
Yeah.
But we are going to have to raise revenues in some way. We do know that there's tremendous public support for the infrastructure investments that have been made under the bipartisan infrastructure law. It is something that people can see in every community across the country. And I think it's things that we've seen in ballot measure after ballot measure, even in this last bruising round of elections, that ballot measures that included things like sidewalks passed with overwhelming support. People recognize the importance and that they are willing then to pay for those assets that they see at an intimate level benefit them.
Yeah, I mean, it's making me think almost that we might see a major divergence in how local governments treat this particular situation in these particular 4 years. And you could envision that, one set of local governments really pursues the status quo, but just figures out a different way to deliver it and a different way of funding public transit or doing public transit, but with public transit at the center. And then I could envision an entirely different set of local governments that's like, F it, let's instead just do total free marketplace and figure out how we deliver all of these services from the private sector. And I think that could be an interesting way, at least, of starting to see if you can get at similar goals for climate, for equity inclusion, and for privacy and security, for that matter, just using different models. But with that said, I think one of the things that has always underpinned civic innovation is ability of public and private sectors to work together. And I want you to talk a little bit about your experience. What are some of the public-private partnerships that you have seen work, and how do you think those might be reflected in the new technologies that we have that are coming out, the technologies that we have that we're trying to scale, and for that matter, in terms of delivering on some of these North Star goals of cities around climate change, et cetera?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we have a real track record now that we can point to of technologies that have rolled into communities, have rolled into cities, and attempted to roll over local regulations and local communities. A number of those are, now in Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection or have gone away, versus those that have come in with a hand outreach, that have come in co-developing policies with localities. I think, there's even more to learn of when localities and their states can collaborate on equal footing. Because we tend to see things in different levels, right? And so there are certain regulations that are approved at the state level, like motor vehicle codes, a number of regulations that cities then govern in the public rights of way, in local enforcement, in infrastructure design. So, those technologies, those service models, those innovations that come really listening to the public sector, trying to understand what are those problems that need to be solved, what are the intractable challenges that localities have, how can I help, how can I be a part of this, and I do need to pay for my own services, right? I am a for-profit business. How can we work this out together? I think those are the ones that we've seen really kind of grow and thrive through great partnerships with both local government and state governments.
Yeah, and I know in talking with a lot of shared mobility providers, one of the issues was the lack of standardization across local governments for public-private partnerships, and the fact that every RFP was different, or every service agreement was different. And I wonder right now how much of an opportunity do local governments have to start standardizing some of those public-private partnerships, and how much of an opportunity do companies have to push local governments to start standardizing those agreements? So
Yeah.
where do you sit on that?
I think it's great. I mean, I think that, having been in an under-resourced local government, I don't think that there's any reason for us to stumble in the dark by ourselves. We all think that we're, novel and unique, but we're not really so different. And so, if Portland has figured something out, or Los Angeles has figured something out, or San Francisco is really demonstrating a way to do things, we really should go ahead and build off of those building blocks. I think organizations like NACTO, organizations like OMF, organizations like ITS America really kind of provide that platform to let that information sharing occur so that we can get to that point of standardization. There might be some customization, right, at the local level different state rules, different funding streams, different authorizations that a locality can do. But I do think that we all work better and understanding what are the outcomes that many cities share, right? So how we can promote those and having that standardization is a much rapid way to scale those, again, value-aligned innovations than having to kind of go hand-to-hand combat city by city.
Yeah, right. Hand-to-hand combat, not great. And you sort of answered the question I had around what's the role of OMF in doing all of this and in supporting local governments through these changes. So I'm going to change my final question to a different one, which is, let's just talk a little bit about the technologies. I mean, civic innovation, we discussed, is part process, part technology. What should local governments really be investing in now? What are some of the changes? And are we at a point where we're scaling technologies, or are we at the point where we're still piloting them and seeing what the readiness levels are of different technologies?
Well, I think that without a doubt, like where we are in a lot of the technologies is to try and make sure that you have a pathway to scaling. It takes a lot, and it takes a high degree of trust. I don't need to tell many in the audience here, for a private business to really have that loss leader of working closely with you as a locality to work out what that pilot demonstration is, to really try and figure it out so that it's a win-win for both the local government as well as the private entrepreneur, but have no path to scaling. So really being aware of what is that path, how can you do that expeditiously, because they're probably losing money in that first initial engagement with you that they need to recoup very quickly if you now want the successful enterprise that you've co-designed with them to actually work. So I don't know that it's necessarily like what is the innovation that they should focus on, but being acutely aware of the path to scaling is something that I think that we have been so entranced with demonstrations and pilots that we haven't really paid enough attention to that pathway to scaling.
Right. Don't experiment, innovate. So, if you're going to do a pilot, make sure you have a roadmap of where you want to go. Okay, I'm going to break my own rule, and I am going to ask one last final question because I was just thinking about Ahmed talking about, folks gathered in a basement hotel room in Minneapolis around a call to action. And if you had to give a call to action to the group here as just some of your final words for this fireside chat, what would you say? What would be your secret message in this basement hotel room in Minneapolis?
I mean, I think the imperative for all of us is evidence-based storytelling. There's a lot that we need to be really clear about. We need to be able to show with data. We need to be able to show with experience. We need to be able to show, despite the alternative facts that may be presented over the next 2 years, that we need to be able to show that sustainable, safe management of the curb, high capacity, prioritization of the public rights of way, preservation of public space, and promotion of equity are paths to a better future. And that's what we really need to be investing in this next transportation bill.
Fantastic. Well, please join me in giving Karina a round of applause.